Hello and welcome back to the Lexi's Leukemia Warrior channel. I'm Jenna. And today's video is going to be a little bit different. I had always said whenever Lexi said that she wanted to start her YouTube channel, like all the people that she watches on YouTube, that I would let her record whatever she wants. And a lot of that is sharing her journey through leukemia. But also, I wanted to be able to use the channel to promote and raise awareness for childhood cancer. And so that is something I've always had my heart set on for all of our different social media platforms. So I went ahead and decided that we were going to do some videos this month for September, which is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. So this is going to kind of be like your introduction to why we are so passionate about childhood cancer. So when I first got Lexi's diagnosis, I dove headfirst into the world of leukemia and research. And I discovered that in general, pediatric cancer only gets 4% of the government's research budget. So the National Cancer Institute gets their budget each year from the government, and basically what that means is the rest of it goes to adult cancer research, and only 4% of the entire budget goes for pediatric cancer. And there's tons of different types of pediatric cancer. There's tons of subtypes of leukemia and lymphomas and stuff like that. So just imagine all the many different types of cancers there are: neuroblastoma, glioblastoma, medulloblastoma, a bunch of brain cancers, DIPG that's incurable, all the different types of sarcoma, Ewing sarcoma, rhabdomyosarcoma. There's Wilms tumor. There's so many different types of childhood cancer, and yet they only get 4% of the national budget. And it just made me so angry that childhood cancer research, a lot of it is funded by grants from nonprofits like the American Cancer Society, the St. Baldrick's Foundation, Alex Lemonade Stand. So over the course of this month, we're going to be sharing with you some great organizations that you can donate to, and other ways that you can help spread awareness about pediatric cancer research and funding. So I kind of wanted to share our story today a little more in depth than what I normally do. A lot of you know that we're a Children's Miracle Network ambassador family, so we have shared our story with people in that capacity. We've also shared our story through the American Cancer Society. And not to say that that's not real, it is, but it's constrained to a time frame, and it's not necessarily super in-depth for the amount of time that we have. And I don't actually tend to go back and really think in depth about what happened the day that Lexi was diagnosed. It's just, it brings back all those emotions, and it's not something I tend to think about. But I've been thinking that maybe I might just want to document it and have it out there. I don't think it's anything that I'll ever forget, but it's definitely something that I want to be able to show Lexi one day when she's a lot older. I want her to be able to look back on all these videos on this channel and be like, wow, I went through so much and I came out stronger on the other side. So today I'm going to be sharing with you just why pediatric cancer is so close to our heart. And to begin our story, you have to jump back with me to July of 2018. 2 years ago, and Lexi was just 2. My husband and I were both working for the same big box retailer. He was working nights and I was working days, so that worked out well as far as Lexi's care, and we did have a sitter. So we were all off Wednesday in the middle of the week because that was 4th of July, and I happened to have that day off in the middle of the week. So then the trade-off was I would have to work that Saturday. And we all had a great time. And then Thursday evening rolls around and Lexi spikes a little bit of a low-grade fever. The next morning it was gone. didn't need any fever medication. So I went ahead and took her to the sitters. My husband was still at work, you know, from overnights. Then Friday rolls around, same thing. Spikes the fever at night, but not during the day. Well, then Saturday rolls around, and my husband's off on Saturday, so I went to work, and he stayed home with her. And then he let me know that the fever was starting to pop up during the day, and it was getting a little bit higher. So Sunday, the fever was pretty persistent, coming and going, creeping up a little higher than what we'd like to see. And at this point, we were trying to alternate fever-reducing medications and weren't having any luck getting it to come down. So I decided that I should probably just call in sick on Monday and take Lexi to the pediatrician to see if they could figure out what was going wrong. So Monday morning rolled around, and I was able to get the first appointment at the pediatrician's office. And the only thing that I knew to tell them about her symptoms were that she looked a little pale, and over the weekend, her energy was less and less, like she just wasn't feeling well, and she just had this fever that would not go away, and we could not figure out the source of this fever. You know, fever-reducing medications weren't working. So the pediatrician agreed with me that yes, she did indeed look a little bit pale, but not generally being able to find anything wrong. She did check her ear, nose, throat, and urine. That's normally the first 4 things you would look at. And she said everything looked normal. So she really was stumped, and she was like, I just don't know what could be making her this pale, but let's get a set of labs, because maybe it's just some general anemia, maybe she needs an iron supplement, something. So she sent us to the lab downstairs in her office and said, just go ahead and get the labs, and then it's just a basic CBC panel, and then I'm going to tell them to put a rush on it because she really does look a little lethargic and pale, and then I'll call you this afternoon with the results. So we got home from the pediatrician's office, and my husband was still sleeping, and Lexi just generally did not look well. She kept laying around. She wasn't really eating a whole bunch. She was not really wanting to drink anymore. She was, for the most part, just laying there, watching a tablet, and I had the TV on for her, and that's pretty much all she wanted to do. It was to the point where she didn't even want to get up and walk anywhere. You had to carry her somewhere because she just didn't have any energy. So I hear the phone ring, and I jump up and I grab my phone, and it was the pediatrician's office because I was pretty anxious at this point because I could tell Lexi didn't feel well, and if she really did need an antibiotic for some type of infection or whatever this was, I really wanted to get figured out what was going on. So the pediatrician tells me that she got the results back from Lexi's labs, and then she asked me if I was sitting down. And so I sat back down on the couch, and I was like, okay, what's up? And she says to me, well, I don't want to alarm you, but all the numbers from Lexi's blood work are extremely low, which kind of made my heart start pounding because I didn't know what this meant. And she said, I don't want to get into too many specifics because I know right now you're not going to understand what I'm saying, but her hemoglobin's low, her platelets are low, her white blood cell count is extremely low. It was only 2. I didn't know that at the time, but it was only 2. And her hemoglobin was only 4. And then she gives me a number that says her neutrophil count. And I didn't know what that was at the time. And she says it was 300. Well, needless to say, I was panicking at this point. And I could hear the edge to her voice, like she was trying to keep it controlled. But there was an edge of panic in her voice too. And so that kind of had me worried because she said at the very least, Lexi was probably going to need some transfusions because of how low her numbers were. And so, of course, that had me scared because I'd never heard anything about that before. And then she says, look, I really don't want to alarm you, but I need to put this bug in your ear. She's like, I'm not saying that this is what it is, but one of the things they try to rule out whenever a child presents with low blood counts is leukemia. It could totally be a bacterial infection or something else that's causing this, but I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that that is probably going to be on their radar and they're going to talk to you about it. Okay, well, so you don't know one way or the other, but... And I was like, all right, so what do we do at this point? And she goes, we are no longer equipped to handle this here. So you need to go straight to St. Louis Children's Hospital ER. That had me concerned. I was like, okay, whoa, wait a minute. That's like the major children's hospital. So this really is serious. She said, I cannot stress to you how important it is that you understand that Lexi's immune system is severely compromised right now. Her blood counts are super low. Like, you don't understand. When you get to there, do not wait in the regular waiting room. She's like, I've already called them ahead. They know that you're coming. They're going to have you a room in isolation, and they should have a mask for Lexi to put on because she cannot be out with the general waiting room of other sick people because her immune system is low enough that she could catch anything like that. Any virus, any infection, any germ that's floating around, her immune system is ripe to catch it, and it could be deadly. So that had me really scared. And then she does something that I know she probably doesn't do for everyone. She gives me her personal cell number. She says, I need you to drive there right now. She's like, don't waste time packing a bag. Take your husband with you. Just go. You can worry about the rest later, but it's absolutely imperative that you get there now. So I'm going to give you my cell phone number. And when you get there, if they're giving you any sort of pushback, if they're not understanding what you're trying to say, you call this number. I will stop what I'm doing, no matter what. I will answer it, and I will explain the situation to them because you cannot wait in that waiting room. So that had me really scared. Like, most pediatricians don't give out their personal number because there is an after-hours number that you can call, the pediatrician's office, where you get a nurse. So that was, like, really scary. So I got off the phone with her, and then I had to go wake Brian up because he was oblivious. He was sleeping. He was set to go to work in, like, I don't know, a few hours. This was like late in the afternoon. We hadn't even eaten dinner yet because it wasn't even dinner time, but we had to go straight to the hospital, so we ended up skipping dinner. So I remember shaking Brian awake and freaking out and, like, probably not making any sense. If he were to recount this, he'd probably say I was going a mile a minute. I'm already blessed with the gift of gab, as they say anyway. So I just don't really think I was making any sense. And I just told him that he needed to hurry up and get clothes on, and we needed to get going. So we grabbed the diaper bag, a few snacks, her water bottle, all stuff for her. And we remembered to grab our phone chargers, and that was about it. And we left. Just the clothes we were wearing. We didn't have any extra things. We didn't really know what was going on at that point. So we get to the ER, and now I know, but you know, at the time it's scary going to somewhere you've never been before. I mean, we'd been there for Lexi's bilateral hip dysplasia and spent a lot of time in Dr. Gordon's office when she had to wear, like, her slings and all these different things, but we'd never actually been through the ER part. And so luckily Children's, St. Louis Children's is top-notch, first class, and they were ready to go. They not only had us speak to the triage nurse in a separate isolated area, like they wouldn't even let us into the regular triage spot because, you know, the triage nurse will see one person right after the other in that spot, and then they'll get assigned a room or whatever. But that means, you know, sick people are in and out with that nurse. So not only was the nurse wearing a mask, but she was in a separate area where she was able to get us input quickly. Right when we got to the front desk, we got through security. They had a mask for us. They had our badges waiting to show that we were ER parents. It was just really quick. So we got to a room, and the first thing they did was access Lexi's arm and start an IV, which was just awful. I mean, now it's like second nature. Lexi gets pokes all the time. She gets her port accessed, you know, but for a parent who's never had to have their child have an IV, it's scary. And we didn't know what was going on. And basically, they wanted a set of repeat labs for themselves, not only to verify the ones from before. They're like, look, we're not saying that those labs are wrong. We're just saying we would like to have a set for ourselves. And plus, if it is a bacterial infection, we can start sending things off for testing right away. So we're going to draw as much blood as we can. We also need to get a cross and type, because if her blood is that low, she is going to start needing transfusions, and it takes a bit to cross and type to make sure that you've got the right blood and platelets and all that other stuff. And so we're not sure what's going on yet, but at the very least, we need a baseline set of labs, and we're going to start the IV so that she can also be having fluids, because she is looking lethargic, dehydrated, pale, like we don't know what's going on yet. Let's not jump to conclusions, but at the very least, this is what we need to do. So we spent a lot of time in the ER that night. It was crazy. People in and out. Lexi's still wearing a mask, looking very pale. The only time she really cried was when they were starting the IV, and then they had to put the thing over her arm so she didn't move it around, and then the board underneath to keep it still. But then once she was done with that, she pretty much just laid there because she was just so tired. She was in my lap because she was freaking out. She didn't know where we were. And the fellow came in. They called somebody from the hematology and oncology floor. Hematology is basically any type of blood disorders. And so they were like, look, we don't know that this is leukemia, because normally with leukemia, you would see other things. So when you have low platelets, normally you have bruising all over, or something called petechiae, which is like a little red rash, but it's not like a raised rash. It's a rash underneath your skin, sort of, where there's like little red pinprick dots. And when you press on it, like how your skin goes white, and like if your skin's red and it turns white, when you press on petechiae, they stay red and they don't go away. So that's how you would normally see someone who presents with leukemia. Not only would they have these bruising, and we're talking unexplained bruise like on the necks and the arms and like your face and, you know, your stomach, just random places where you wouldn't even think of. You would also have a really high white blood cell count. So Lexi's white blood cells were 2. Like the hemoglobin being low is totally normal for leukemia. But the white blood cells upon diagnosis, that's usually one of the criteria on how they diagnose you, is whether or not your white blood cells are 50,000 and above or 50,000 and less. That tells you what risk category you get put in during the first month of treatment while they wait to see if you reach remission or not. And so 50,000 white blood cells, and Lexi has 2. And so we weren't even near like that realm. So they're looking at this going, she would also have an enlarged spleen. They felt her spleen. They didn't feel that it was enlarged. So basically the only thing they had to go on was her low hemoglobin and slightly low platelets, but not low enough that it was causing bruising. And then she looked pale. But again, that was due to the low hemoglobin. So they were on the fence about even if they were sure that it was leukemia, because apparently there's other bacterial infections like something called a BK virus that can cause low blood counts, like a low hemoglobin. So the fellow said that she was going to consult with somebody else from the floor, and they were going to come to a consensus, and they would let me know, but that they agreed that Lexi needed to be moved up to floor 9 because that's the hematology and oncology floor, and obviously they couldn't send us home because she was going to need blood transfusions at the very least, but they wanted to try to get it figured out, so we would at least be spending the night in the hospital while they started doing some testing and getting the transfusions ready to go. So we made it up in the middle of the night to floor 9, hematology and oncology. They call it HEMONC for short. And we tried to get a little bit of sleep while they were in and out getting Lexi's blood transfusions going. As it turns out, Lexi is O negative. So she is the universal donor, but she can only receive O negative, which is not necessarily bad, but sometimes if they're short, it can be if you have to wait. But thankfully, we've never had that issue. So they got that going, and then bright and early the next morning, the main fellow for the floor that day, his name was Dr. Sisk, he comes into the room with a huge stack of papers, and he says, okay, let's just recap what happened last night. So basically, everyone's been on the fence, but we feel that it's in the best interest to go ahead and do a bone marrow biopsy. He said basically it's where they're going to take a sample of bone marrow and fluid from her hip. And they're also going to do a spinal tap where they take a sample of cerebrospinal fluid to see if they can figure out what's going on. And that will rule out for us yay or nay. Either she does have leukemia or she doesn't. And if she doesn't, then we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what she does have. And the blood cultures, some of them we have to send out for testing to the Mayo Clinic, like the BK virus and the parvovirus. Those have to get sent out to like a more specialty lab, and those could take a couple or 3 days to find out the results. So he's like, in the meantime, we can try to rule out leukemia. He's like, because I'm going to be honest, we don't know for sure, but she doesn't have the enlarged spleen, the bruising, or the high white blood cell count that is more indicative of a leukemia diagnosis. So we're still a little on the fence about that, but we feel that it's best to just go ahead and rule it out. So again, we still have this glimmer of hope. It's like they weren't saying 100% no, it isn't this, and they weren't saying 100% yes, it is this. They weren't trying to necessarily dash our hope, but they weren't trying to like make us super confident, because they just basically have to tell the truth, and that was their truth. They just weren't for sure because she didn't have all these hallmark symptoms that you would normally see. It was literally just the fever, being pale, and lethargic. But the being pale and the lethargic, and they said possibly the fever, could be explained by her low hemoglobin. They were actually really surprised that she was still alert and not passed out. Her hemoglobin was 4. Any lower and she could have died. So I guess we got really lucky that we got there when we did and found everything out. So we spent the day prepping for her results or for her procedure the following day, because that was at that point we're into Tuesday, right? Because we went there on a Monday night, so we're into Tuesday. So when you go under for procedures, she had to be put under general anesthesia. You have to be something called MPO, which is Latin, that stands for nothing by mouth. So you can't have anything to eat or drink because it can cause complications with the anesthesia. So we had to wait and get her worked into the schedule for the following day, like bright and early Wednesday morning, because, they're a big hospital. They're doing stuff all day long. They're doing sedated MRIs, and they've got already kids on the schedule for LPs and tubes in their ears and whatever else. So basically, we're just a work-in, but we're considered an emergency because they need to know. So unfortunately, sometimes you either bump somebody or they can try to squeeze you in between two. So it was, Lexi wasn't able to eat anything. So they were able to get us in Wednesday morning to get that testing done. And we still hadn't heard back from any of the blood cultures yet. So we were just hoping that this spinal tap and this bone marrow biopsy would give us some type of answers, because it's just hard not knowing when you just don't know for sure what's going on and you're just kind of waiting. At that point, I had stayed with Lexi, and Brian had to go home and pack us a bag. Like Tuesday, after we knew more what was going on, Brian had to drive back home because we literally had the clothes that we walked in with and what little we had in Lexi's diaper bag, and then our wallets. Like, we didn't have any toiletries, we didn't have any changes of clothes for us or for Lexi, our toothbrush, none of it. And we were just feeling pretty gross, and I really wanted to take a shower, and I couldn't because I didn't have any of that stuff and I had nothing to change into. So poor Brian had to go home and then call me on the phone and try to figure out what he needed to pack and just throw stuff in a suitcase, basically, as he's like FaceTiming me, like, which pants do you want? Which shirt? Like, it was terrible, okay? It was hard, but you just do what you gotta do. So Wednesday morning came around, and they did the bone marrow biopsy. We had to do it on the general surgery floor for floor 6 because they were working us in. So unfortunately, normally spinal taps and stuff would be done in a different area, but since we were a work-in, that's just how they had to do it. And it was rough. She was in a lot of pain in her hip, and it was sore where they had done it, so she didn't really want to move around, and she just wanted to lay around. And she slept a lot due to the meds. So, you know, she was still getting fluids, and they were giving her just a broad spectrum antibiotic until they could figure out what was going wrong because her counts were so low. And they were, you know, continuing to give blood transfusions to make sure she was stabilized. So it was just a waiting game. So they said we'd have official pathology results back by that Friday. So we knew that it could take up to a week, which we were hoping maybe we would hear back from one of the specialty labs about a virus or something, so we'd get some answers. But in the meantime, we were stuck in the hospital till we heard back from something. Well, imagine our surprise when Wednesday night Dr. Sis comes knocking while Lexi's asleep. He has a nurse with him, a patient care tech, I think it was actually. And the patient care tech was going to sit with Lexi while she was asleep, just in case she woke up, so there'd be somebody there. And he said that he needed to speak with us. And so he led us down a hallway to a little private conference room that didn't have any windows, so we could have our privacy. And we followed him in there. And he stood across from us and said, well, why don't you have a seat? And Brian and I kind of didn't know what was going on, and he just kind of grabbed my hand underneath the table. And I remember my heart was just pounding out of my chest. And I'm like, all right, whatever this is, let's just get this over with, Lord. Just let's get this over with. And so he sat down across from us, and he just kind of looked at us and he said, well, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to come right out and say it. I had a chance to review the slides of her bone marrow biopsy myself. Yes, they're getting sent back off to the lab for actual, real deal testing and pathology and the whole nine. But I can look at and preview the slides myself, and I've been doing this a long time. I'm a fellow, and I've never been wrong. And after looking at the preliminary smears on the slides, it does look like your daughter has cancer. She has leukemia. Sorry. And I just sat there. And he was getting ready to speak again. And I remember I just put up my finger and said, "Could you just give me a minute?" And I turned to Brian, and I just started crying. There is no parenting manual that prepares you to hear that your daughter has cancer. So he continued on. Oh, sorry. And he basically said that the type of leukemia that she had is very treatable. She has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The other type is acute myeloid leukemia, which is a little harder to treat. And that she had pre-B cell, which means that it affects her immature B cells. And they were basically crowding out her good cells. And that was what was causing her hemoglobin and all her low counts and everything. And that it was just an unusual presentation. But that the bone marrow biopsy confirms it. And that we would get the official pathology back that said, that it was for sure pre-B cell, and then they would do flow cytometry and check the cytogenics to see what types of genetics her leukemia was, as to was it good genetics, bad genetics, indifferent, and it would help classify her in a risk category, assuming she got into remission after the first month, which was a lot to take in. So then he says that she is going to need to start intensive chemotherapy right away. They aren't even waiting for the official pathology. At this point, it's bad enough that they just need to go ahead and start and then they'll get the results on Friday that confirm what they already know, basically. It's just in a more official capacity. So basically, we were like, okay, we got to do this. So he left the room and told us to take all the time we need and just hit the light when we were done, and we could just go back to our room and relieve the CNA. And I remember we just both broke down. I don't see Bryant cry very often. I really don't. He's just not one to share his emotions, and that's okay. And he was crying. Because it's scary. You don't know what's going to happen. And it's our only child, and we struggled for 3 years to have Lexi with all of the issues I have. And now to find out she has cancer. We didn't know what to do. We prayed. And that's all we could do. So we went back to the hospital room to relieve the CNA, and I remember we were just like standing at her bed staring at her like, you've got to be kidding. And so things progressed really rapidly. They weren't joking. She had to be MPO again because they had to put a port in her chest, because that's how they were going to administer all her chemo, was through a port in her chest. And then they were also going to take another sample of cerebrospinal fluid. And while they were in there, they were also going to administer her first chemo into the spinal fluid. Basically, her spinal fluid had been clear the whole time, but in order for it to stay clear, they have to inject chemotherapy directly into the spinal fluid, because if the chemo is, or if the cancer is in the spinal fluid, depending upon how bad it is, you might have to get radiation, which you want to avoid if you can at all possible. Luckily, Lexi's never had it in her spinal fluid, and hopefully she won't relapse in the spinal fluid or anything, so they just keep injecting it into the spinal fluid, doing lumbar punctures every so often, and that's hopefully going to keep it away out of there. So again, she had to go down to floor 6, the general operating floor, and we were running on no sleep. My parents had come to visit from 3 hours away, and I remember they were in the waiting room with us while we were waiting for her to be done with that surgery, and they just, we just finally said, you just need to go home. We don't know what we need. We don't know which way's up right now. We just don't know what's going on. So we appreciate you coming, but please, we need some space right now to get our heads above water. So my parents left. I know they felt bad, and at the time I felt bad for sending them away, but honestly, we just needed time to process. We had no sleep. There was no sense in them being there. They could just get updates from home rather than being, 3 hours away, and that way they could share those updates with the rest of our family. So we didn't have to constantly text a barrage of people. So I remember they called us to a small room. They had these little rooms in the waiting room where the surgeon could come out and talk to the family or whoever was there. And so it was quite a long surgery, and then we went into the little room with him, and it was basically the surgeon, and he just explained that everything went well and that she was in recovery, and as soon as we were done talking to him, we could go back to wait on her to wake up from the anesthesia, and that he gave us all kinds of information about her port. There's like a little packet that comes with it, which I'll share later on in a different video. But I mean, I guess if you're gonna get, surgery, at least you want to hear that it goes well. Not that you want your child to have a port put in their chest, but it is what it is. So we were able to go see Lexi in the recovery area before we were going to wheel her back to her room, which was basically going to be our home, floor 9 oncology, for a while. So I remember getting in there, and she had already started waking up, and she was in a lot of pain. I mean, they literally sliced open her chest. And I know she was going to get pain meds, and she was going to get, pain meds through her port and whatever else, but it was a lot. And I had never heard her cry like that before. She just wanted her mommy. And it was hard to hold her because her chest was so sensitive, and it was really trying to figure out the best way to lean forward so I wasn't putting any pressure on her chest, but she was just clinging to me. She was just wailing. I had never heard her cry like that before. This is not your typical, I fell down and scraped my knee. This is, I am freaking out scared. I am in a tremendous amount of pain. I don't know where I am. I feel awful type of wail. And all she could do was cry. And it was awful. And Brian and I were literally standing there trying not to cry and trying not to mess with all the tubes and the wires and everything coming out. And I think we were just really scared, and we didn't know what was going on. And we made it back up to the room, thank goodness. And she was on pain meds, and they had told us to go slow with the food. Because after anesthesia, and being NPO this whole time, and everything that happened, you don't just want to start scarfing down food right after that, because it could give them an upset stomach. So we got a little napkin, and we were putting some goldfish on it, and I'm trying to tell her to just take it slow, one at a time. But of course she's hungry, and I should have known better, and I shouldn't have dumped half a bag of Cheetos right there. So she's just grabbing him by the fistful and just shoving him down because she's starving. And then in less than an hour, she threw up all over herself because she couldn't handle it from all the anesthesia and everything else, and it was just awful. And I felt so terrible. I'm like, geez, my only job today was go slow on the food, and there I was. I felt like I had screwed up. Brian reassured me that it wasn't my fault, but I think those first few months, any wrong turn or misstep that we made, we were constantly beating ourselves up like we could have done better, should have done better. Luckily, the nurses reassured us that it's okay. It happens all the time. You can't control your kid. They sneak it when you're not looking. They just shove as much in as they can. You don't realize. They helped us get her cleaned up and get her into some fresh PJs. And after that, she slept a lot. So by Friday, we got the official pathology back, and then we spent another week in the hospital. She had to get a lot of those first chemos and make sure there wasn't going to be any type of reactions. There's a particular chemo that has the highest chance for anaphylaxis, and so they kind of want to get those first few chemos under your belt, and then once she's stabilized, they give her one last blood transfusion to tank her up before we go home. And then we started outpatient treatment. So then we just go to the Siteman Kids Cancer Center, which is also still on floor 9. It's just the other side of floor 9. And that's where we've been going ever since. Still had a few hospital stays along the way, and it's been a long road. But she gets to ring the bell in October, and we're so excited. So that is basically the story, the more in-depth story of how Lexi was diagnosed. So that's a little bit of insight into why we are so passionate about childhood cancer. It's one of those things that you don't think about it happening to you. Like, I'm a Children's Miracle Network ambassador family, and before that I was the Children's Miracle Network fundraising coordinator for like all my stores that I worked at. That's just something I enjoyed doing, and I enjoyed helping people. But it really hits home once it happens to you. It's like seeing all those people's stories year after year at all the big, fundraising kickoff meetings for the register campaign and whatnot. And then to actually have one of those real life stories happen to your family is just crazy. And it really gives you a new perspective. So as we go into the month of September in just 3 days, let's see, today's Saturday, so September starts Tuesday. We are going to be sharing some videos about childhood cancer awareness. Lexi has helped me plan these out, and she's going to help me with all these videos, and we are hopefully going to bring awareness and shine a light on pediatric cancer as we go gold this month. And we are going to share a little bit about Lexi's life. So thank you for watching this video today. I didn't realize how long I was going to talk, sorry. So if you made it this far, thank you. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you would like to see more videos. The more subscribers we get, Lexi's lofty goal is 1,000. I don't know if we'll get there, but the more subscribers we get, the more this channel will be suggested to others, and hopefully we can spread awareness to as many people as possible about pediatric cancer research. You can also feel free to follow us on our other social medias. We're on Twitter at Lexi's Leukemia, all lowercase. We're also on Instagram at Lexi's Leukemia, all lowercase. And if you haven't already, you can join her Facebook group. It's a public group, but you still have to join, and it's called Lexi's Leukemia Warriors, just like her YouTube channel. Thank you so much, and I will be seeing you in the course of this month for some more videos. Bye.